What if a simple act of kindness on a snowy mountain road could change your entire life? In a quiet town tucked beneath the shadow of the mountains, a struggling single father crosses paths with a mysterious woman stranded in a storm. He doesn't know she's a billionaire, fleeing her own kind of loneliness. And neither of them could imagine how one night would set off a chain of events that would transform not just their lives, but an entire community. This is a story about second chances, about how goodness has a way of coming back to you, and how love sometimes arrives when and where you least expect it. Before we dive into this heartfelt journey, if you enjoy stories about hope, love, and the quiet power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the inspiring tales we share here, each one crafted to leave you with something warm and lasting. Now, let's begin. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Haven Ridge, sweeping flecks of snow across the cracked pavement like tiny shards of glass. Calder Hayes pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he locked the worn wooden door of his modest cabin. The crunch of his boots echoed faintly in the stillness, the only sound aside from the distant whistle of the mountain wind. He paused at the edge of his porch, glancing toward the endless stretch of pine trees lining the base of the mountains. The peaks loomed silent and white, their sharp ridges catching the faintest glimmer of the sinking sun. Winter here was a thing that seeped into your bones, not just through the cold, but in the silence, the isolation. Behind him, the faint sound of humming drifted from inside. Maisie, his daughter's small voice, carried lightly, off-key and innocent as she colored by the fireplace. Calder smiled faintly, though there was a tiredness to the curve of his lips. She was 8 now, the bright spot in an otherwise muted existence. Since her mother passed 3 years ago, Maisie had become his world, a fragile, beautiful thing he was desperate to protect, even as the weight of life pressed heavier with each passing winter. Calder stepped off the porch, his breath clouding. In the frigid air, he crossed the yard toward the small tool shed, the structure sagging under years of neglect. Another repair job had fallen through that morning. The Johnsons decided they'd fix their roof themselves, money being tight this year. He didn't blame them. It was the same story all over Haven Ridge. Times were hard. They'd always been hard, but Calder wasn't one to complain. He simply rolled up his sleeves, fixed what he could, and moved forward, one step at a time. Inside the shed, he retrieved his toolbox, pausing to glance at the photo taped to the inside wall. A young woman with laughing eyes holding a toddler, his late wife, Laurel. He pressed his fingertips briefly against the image, a small ritual, before heading back toward the house. Maisie met him at the door, her brown curls poking out from beneath a knitted hat that hung too low on her forehead. "Daddy, is Mr. Ira coming over tonight?" she asked, hopeful. Calder shook his head. "Not tonight, Bug. Too cold for him to be out." Maisie's face fell, but she nodded. "I was going to show him my drawing." "You can show me instead," Calder offered gently, wiping his boots before stepping inside. She beamed, already racing to grab her latest masterpiece from the hearth. Calder crouched down beside her as she held it up proudly. A crooked house under a mountain with stick figures standing by a tree. In the corner, a blazing yellow sun, incongruously bright for the gray world outside. "That's us," she explained, pointing to the stick figures. "You, me, and Mr. Ira, and that's Mommy, up in the sun." Calder felt something catch in his chest. He smoothed a hand over her hair, the ache of love and longing mixing in his throat. "It's perfect, Maisie." They spent the evening as they often did, quietly, simply. Calder fixed a leaky faucet while Maisie read aloud from her storybook. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. Outside, the wind howled stronger. By the time he tucked Maisie into bed, the temperature had dropped sharply. Calder stood for a moment at her doorway, watching her chest rise and fall in sleep, her fingers curled loosely around the worn, stuffed rabbit she wouldn't part with. When he returned to the small kitchen, he poured himself a mug of weak coffee, staring out the window at the dark stretch of road leading into the mountains. Snowflakes swirled chaotically under the porch light. It was then he saw them, headlights dim and flickering, cutting uncertainly through the curtain of snow. A vehicle, inching its way down the winding road, dangerously close to the ditch that lined the edge. Calder set down his mug. Something about the way the car crawled forward sent a prickle down his spine. He grabbed his coat, pulling it over his shoulders as he stepped back out into the cold. The wind bit at his face as he jogged to the edge of the road. The car, a dark SUV, lurched slightly, its tires spinning uselessly in the snow. Calder waved his arms, motioning the driver to stop. The window rolled down, revealing a woman inside, her face pale, eyes wide with unease. She looked out of place amidst the storm, her hair perfectly styled, her coat far too thin for the weather. "Are you all right?" Calder called over the wind. She leaned toward the window. I think I took a wrong turn. I'm trying to get down the mountain, but I can't see a thing." Calder nodded, assessing the way her tires were partially sunk in the snow. "You're not going to make it down in this. Best you come inside, wait it out." She hesitated, glancing back toward the winding, treacherous road, clearly debating whether to trust a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Calder lifted his hands, palms up. "Got a little one in the house, safe as can be." That seemed to sway her. She gave a small, almost reluctant nod. Calder guided her carefully out of the SUV, grabbing a flashlight as he led her toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth from the fire met them like a soft embrace. Maisie stirred slightly from her room, but didn't wake. The woman stood awkwardly near the door, brushing snowflakes from her coat. Calder offered his hand. "Name's Calder Hayes." There was a pause before she took it, her grip delicate. "Juniper," she said simply. "Juniper Vaughn." The name didn't mean anything to him. Just another traveler caught in the storm. But outside, the wind howled louder, as if signaling that both their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The cabin felt smaller now, with a stranger standing inside, her polished presence somehow at odds with the worn furniture and creaking floorboards. Calder hung his coat by the door, brushing snow from his sleeves as he glanced over at Juniper. Vaughn. She stood near the hearth, shifting awkwardly, her hands still gloved, eyes darting about the room like she wasn't sure where to land. "Make yourself comfortable," Calder offered, his voice even but not overly warm. He was a man who measured his words carefully, much like how he measured the wood he worked with, precise, functional, no excess. Juniper peeled off her gloves, then hesitated before finally unbuttoning her coat. Underneath, she wore a fitted sweater that seemed more suited for a city coffee shop than a snowstorm. She rubbed her arms, her posture tense, shoulders drawn tight. "You can sit." Calder nodded toward the old armchair near the fire. "I'll put on some coffee," she offered. A small, polite smile, but didn't speak, lowering herself gingerly onto the chair as though it might collapse beneath her. Calder moved to the stove, filling the kettle with practiced motions, all the while studying her from the corner of his eye. Something about her unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit in the picture. Her clothes, her mannerisms, the way her gaze lingered on the chipped countertops and faded curtains. She was clearly not from around here. Maisie's soft footsteps padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. Calder turned quickly. "Bug, everything all right?" She stopped when she noticed Juniper blinking sleepily. "Who's that?" Calder crouched down beside his daughter. "This is Miss Juniper. She got caught in the storm. She'll stay here tonight." Maisie's shyness flickered only briefly before curiosity took over. She stepped forward, her head tilted. "Do you like drawing?" she asked without preamble. Juniper blinked, then offered the faintest smile. "I suppose I do." Maisie nodded, approvingly, as though that answered all questions. "You can sit by the fire, it's warmer there." Calder hid a smile as he poured water into 2 chipped mugs, sliding one toward Juniper. She accepted it with a murmured thank you, her fingers curling around the mug like she needed something solid to hold on to. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackling of the logs and the whistle of wind against the window panes. Calder didn't rush to fill it. Years of solitary nights had taught him that sometimes quiet spoke louder than words. Finally, Juniper broke it. "You live here long?" she asked, her voice softer now, testing the waters. "All my life," Calder answered simply. "This cabin's been in my family 3 generations." She nodded, staring into the fire. "It's peaceful." He studied her face in the flickering light, sharp cheekbones, faint traces of fatigue under her eyes. Not the kind of tired that came from physical labor, but something deeper. Emotional exhaustion, maybe. He'd seen enough of that in himself to recognize it. "You're not from around here," Calder said, not as a question but a fact. Juniper let out a soft breath, the corner of her mouth twitching. "No, passing through, I guess." Maisie yawned and leaned against her father's side, her thumb slipping toward her mouth before she caught herself and stood up straighter. Calder smoothed her curls. "Why were you driving up here this late?" he asked, voice level. For a moment, Juniper seemed to hesitate, her gaze flickering toward the window like she might bolt back out into the storm. "I needed to get away," she admitted finally. "Too many things." Pressing in, Calder didn't pry further. Everyone had reasons for running, some louder than others. He nodded toward the small bedroom. "You can take Maisie's room tonight. She'll bunk with me." Juniper opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, but something in Calder's steady gaze told her arguing would be wasted breath. She simply nodded, murmuring another quiet, "Thank you." As he stood to guide Maisie to bed, she tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we keep her?" she whispered, too soft for Juniper to hear. Calder chuckled under his breath, ruffling her hair. "She's not a stray pup, Bug." Still, the thought lingered longer than it should as he tucked Maisie in. The weight of loneliness sitting a little heavier on his chest tonight. Later, after the house had settled into stillness, Calder stood by the kitchen window, looking out over the snow-blanketed yard. The moon peeked through ragged clouds, casting pale light over the empty road. Somewhere far off, a coyote's call echoed against the mountains. Behind him, he could hear the faint rustle of Juniper shifting in the spare room, her steps careful, unfamiliar with the creaks and groans of an old house. He wondered briefly what kind of life she came from, what world she'd left behind to find herself stranded in the middle of nowhere. There was something about her presence he couldn't quite shake, like a storm gathering just out of sight. But storms, Calder knew, had a way of revealing more than they destroyed. He took one last look at the moonlit peaks, then turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, when the storm cleared, perhaps she'd be on her way, or perhaps not. Morning came slow and grey, the sky still heavy with remnants of last night's storm. The snow had settled thick across Haven Ridge, muffling sound and softening every edge. Calder stood at the sink, watching as a few brave birds fluttered near, the bare branches outside, pecking for whatever they could find. Behind him, the faint shuffle of footsteps echoed, cautious and unfamiliar. Juniper appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair pulled hastily back, a borrowed sweater from Maisie, draped loosely over her frame. It hung slightly oversized, but she wore it with quiet grace. "Morning," Calder greeted without turning. "Good morning." Her voice was lighter, but still carried that hint of hesitation, as though she was unsure how much space she was allowed to occupy. Calder set down the mug he'd been nursing. "Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." She nodded, stepping carefully toward the counter, as if afraid to disturb the rhythm of the house. Calder noticed how her eyes drifted to the small details. The chipped tile near the stove, the stack of schoolbooks on the table, the worn coat draped over a chair. It struck him again how she seemed out of place, like a piece from another puzzle entirely. Maisie came bounding in a moment later, all sleepy energy and crooked smiles. "Morning, Miss Juniper," she chirped, tugging at her father's sleeve. "Can I show her the barn?" Calder raised an eyebrow. "Snow's still deep out there, Bug." Maisie pouted but turned to Juniper expectantly. Juniper glanced toward the window, where the sunlight struggled to break through the thick clouds. "I don't mind," she said softly. "If it's all right with you." Calder hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Stay close." Maisie whooped, already pulling on her boots. Calder grabbed his own coat, offering Juniper an extra scarf without comment as they stepped out into the cold. The world outside was whitewashed, pristine, almost too quiet. Snow crunched underfoot as they trudged toward the old barn, the structure sagging slightly under years of weather and wear. Maisie bounded ahead, chattering about the chickens they used to keep and how Daddy promised to fix up the place once spring comes. Calder watched Juniper as she moved carefully through the drifts, one hand brushing against the weathered wood of the barn door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of hay and old timber. Light streamed through cracks in the roof, illuminating dust, motes swirling lazily. Maisie darted to the far corner, pointing out a nest tucked beneath a rafter. "See, sometimes birds still come in here." Juniper smiled, crouching beside her. "It's like a little hiding place." Maisie nodded solemnly. "Daddy says even broken things can still be useful." Calder, standing nearby, felt Juniper, glanced toward him at that. There was a pause, quiet but full. Juniper traced a finger along one of the support beams, her expression thoughtful. "This place has a character," she murmured. Calder gave a short laugh, rough around the edges. "That's one word for it." Maisie tugged at Juniper's hand, leading her to the ladder that once led to the loft. "Daddy says when Mommy was here they used to sit up there and watch stars." Juniper's gaze softened. "That sounds nice." Maisie nodded, her voice quieter now. "Sometimes I think Mommy still watches us." Calder swallowed thickly, clearing his throat. "All right, Bug. Let's not stay out too long." They trudged back toward the cabin, snowflakes beginning to fall again in soft spirals. Inside, Juniper helped Maisie peel off her layers, brushing snow from her hair with surprising tenderness. It was a simple moment, but it caught Calder off guard, the way Juniper knelt beside his daughter like she'd done it 1,000 times before, as if she fit naturally into the space she'd only just entered. Later, while Maisie busied herself at the table drawing, Calder stood by the fire, glancing at Juniper as she stared out the window. "You're good with her," he remarked, casually. She looked over, surprised. "She's easy to be around," he nodded, folding his arms across his chest. "Not everyone knows what to do with kids." Juniper hesitated, then turned back to the window. "I didn't have much of a family growing up, just expectations." Her voice trailed off, the weight of unsaid things filling the space between them. Calder didn't press, but something inside him shifted slightly, a realization maybe that beneath her polished exterior she carried cracks of her own. By late afternoon, the snow had eased, and Calder went about stacking wood near the shed. He noticed Juniper lingering nearby, her hands tucked deep in her borrowed coat. "You always fix everything yourself?" she asked, watching as he hammered a loose plank back into place. He shrugged. "Somebody has to." She chewed her lip thoughtfully, then blurted, "Where I come from, people pay others to do everything." Calder didn't answer immediately. He could feel the tension rolling off her, the conflict she tried to keep hidden beneath polite smiles. Finally, he met her gaze. "Sometimes doing things yourself is the only way to know they're done right." Her eyes flickered, something unreadable flashing across them as the sun dipped low, casting a soft orange glow over the snow. Calder motioned toward the house. "Supper's simple," he said, "but you're welcome." She gave him a small, genuine smile. Simple sounds good, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it felt like something fragile but real had settled between them. Not questions, not pretenses, just two people who knew what it was to patch things together, even when life left cracks. The next day broke clearer, though the heavy snow still blanketed the town in thick silence. The kind of quiet that almost felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. Calder stood by the window, sipping his coffee, eyes scanning the mountain ridge where yesterday's storm had swept through. The roads were still slick, the sky pale and empty. Juniper sat quietly at the kitchen table, Maisie beside her, both hunched over a sheet of paper. Calder watched as Maisie explained her drawing, stick figures standing by a crooked house, a yellow sun smiling in the corner. Juniper listened attentively, nodding and asking questions, as though she'd known Maisie for much longer than 2 days. There was something effortless about the way Juniper blended into the morning routine. No pretense, no polite distance like the night before. Calder wasn't sure if it unsettled him or made the house feel less hollow. After breakfast, he shrugged on his coat and gestured toward the door. "Heading over to Della's cafe. She needs the porch steps fixed before the next freeze." Juniper looked up, something flickering behind her eyes. "Do you need a hand?" Calder raised an eyebrow. "You ever handled a hammer?" She smiled faintly. "I can learn." Maisie clapped her hands. "Can I come too?" He glanced at his daughter's hopeful face, then back to Juniper. Against his better judgment, or maybe because of something else entirely, he nodded. "All right, let's go." The town of Havenridge was the kind where everyone knew everyone, and strangers didn't go unnoticed. As they walked toward the main street, the snow crunching beneath their boots, Calder caught the curious glances tossed their way. Della's cafe sat at the corner, a modest building with faded red shutters, a hand-painted sign swaying in the wind. Della Monroe herself stood on the porch, bundled in a thick scarf, her eyes sharp and knowing. She gave Calder a nod, then her gaze slid over to Juniper, lingering. "Well now," Della said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Didn't expect you'd be bringing help." Calder grunted. Seemed she needed something to do. Juniper extended a polite smile. "I'm Juniper, just passing through." Della's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, but she didn't pry. Instead, she motioned toward the steps. "Those boards have been loose since last winter. Took me near breaking my neck yesterday." Calder set to work, pulling out his tools. Maisie plopped herself down on the steps, content to watch. Juniper stood beside him, attentive, silent at first as she observed his movements. "You do this for a living?" she asked after a while, voice soft. "Fix things," Calder replied without looking up. "Yeah, houses, barns, whatever needs mending." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Why not leave? Move somewhere with more opportunity." Calder paused, hammer poised mid-air. He glanced at her, something guarded behind his eyes. "This is home." Juniper opened her mouth, but whatever she intended to say, she swallowed it back. Instead, she knelt beside him, fingers brushing against the edge of a splintered board. "Tell me what to do," she said simply. For the next hour, they worked in companionable silence. Calder showed her how to steady the nails, how to measure before cutting. She listened carefully, hands awkward at first, but gaining confidence. Maisie cheered each time a new plank was secured, her laughter bouncing off the frosted windows. Inside the cafe, Della watched through the glass, her expression unreadable. When the last board was in place, Calder stood back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. Juniper straightened, breathing hard, strands of hair sticking to her cheek. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked almost content, grounded. Della stepped outside, handing Calder 2 mugs of coffee, then offering one to Juniper. "You've got steady hands."